And so I spend a lot of my time working with my faculty and my students to, when they come up with ideas or they have apps or, maybe a different way of doing something, teaching, learning, or what have you, we ideate it, we start to spin it out. And it's really looking at schools differently, and looking at school as not just a place of learning to develop, but also a place of learning to impact the world. And so the years of experience working in both, business and education has given me the ability to look at our schools through 3 lenses. And it's like looking at school through a learning lens, looking at school through a business lens, like the business model of how we fund schools, and also looking at schools through the development lens of human development. So how are we developing our people, like our faculty? How are we designing learning in the classroom differently? And then how do we fund it all? Because it does not matter that you have this great idea for innovative learning if you can't pay for it. So how can we fund our public schools differently? That is a real big question. When they come to us at university level around design thinking and entrepreneurship and innovation, it's not too late, but the mindset, the growth mindset, or the entrepreneurial mindset is already set or not. So that's what kind of inspired me to start, getting into high school and then K-12, and really looking at how do we design learning so that our children are really at that early ages. We have children, as I said, in kindergarten and grade 1, and our culture is of growth mindset. So, it's just a very different environment to learn in. And I'd love to see every school in America have similar culture to what our students have. And that's what we're looking at now. It's been very successful for 6 years. How do we now share how we do things so other schools cannot do it exactly the same, because no organization or school can do things the same, but how can they take what would suit them? Or how can we learn from each other? And so I've been in that sector, and probably about 3-4 years ago, myself and a couple of others launched an initiative called Grateful for Her, which is really looking at the narrative, the storytelling narrative of women. So women, for example, and especially women of color, live in a deficit model of less than. And whether it be being compared to men, compared to each other, compared to social norms, it's always like we're playing catch up. And even our language is often a deficit of less. So Grateful for Her is actually, so gratitude is a healing emotion, and it's also a social connector. So for example, you might do something wonderful for me, and I might feel gratitude, but you don't necessarily feel connected to that until I express it. And so I can say thank you, or I could share a story about how and why I'm grateful for you, and that'll have such a different impact on you. Women around money is really interesting in terms of how we shy away from negotiation. We shy away my dad taught me very young, if it's not in writing, it doesn't exist. And that's regarding contracts. And, and in doing the studies around women and how much the equity and inequity in pay, it's really interesting to look at not just the industries that we're in because of that, but how quickly we go, no, it's okay, or not charging, when actually a peer and a male peer he'll charge the fee. And so it's really understanding about what is your worth, what is your time worth, what is your expertise worth. I think our children, from even before they're born, they're being socialized into a way of being around gender, and both, their physical gender, their psychological gender. We don't actually allow children much freedom to find their identity on their terms. We talk nowadays as well about how young people have a digital identity before they're even born, and their parents are starting to frame everything about them. So when children come into our school, it's fascinating, but it's also, at what point, parents are now registering domain names for their children's names and setting them up on Facebook accounts. But there is also a fluidity that I think is happening and has been happening from elementary and middle school students down now, where there is a little bit more of a confidence in expressing identity. And I think because parents now of children in middle school and so forth in certain areas are actually allowing that fluidity and freedom. So they're not as hung up on boys do this and girls do that. It's now, there are multiple genders, multiple ways to express yourself. And it's no longer derogatory to say run like a girl. It's actually something now that actually, it's quite empowering. I'm more concerned around gamification and gaming cultures right now. There is such a low percentage of women in coding and gaming. And that's because of, so I think it was in the 80s where there was a change in advertising from major companies in how they advertise technology as being very masculine and more having male dominated traits. And so that's definitely got a knock-on effect. And I see in schools, gamers, as we call them, start to form groups and clubs to code and develop games or apps together. And often it is gendered. And you have to socially design it in certain ways to be able to disrupt that a little bit.